Reading from Plato's Phaedrus today, and just looking at a really small section that I find really very interesting. We're at Stephanus number 259A through 259D, maybe 259E. It's the part we call the myth of the cicadas. It's one of the most interesting places in the dialogue to me. It's a place in the dialogue I've spoken about at conferences. I have a cicada tattoo, really quite enamored with this part of the dialogue. So let's read it first. Let's jump right in. We have Phaedrus and Socrates. This is we're getting into the second half of the dialogue now. We've done all this stuff about love and madness and the soul, and we're working through now getting into the heart of this core theme about rhetoric and philosophy. But this is an interesting aside, an interesting kind of diversion for Socrates here. And it's so cool because it's a it's part of the setting of the dialogue. Socrates is hearing the cicadas and then he's using that as inspiration. Um, okay, so I'm at, well, just I'm at 258, 259, right at 259. Socrates says, "It seems we clearly have the time. Besides, I think that the cicadas, who are singing and carrying on conversations with one another in the heat of the day above our heads, are also watching us." And remember, Phaedrus and Socrates, importantly, have left the walls of the city of Athens and they're sitting outside underneath the shade of the plane tree. They're in a real place. That's so helpful when we're thinking about reading this dialogue, as Socrates and Phaedrus are sitting in the shade of the tree in the heat of the summer day, having this exchange, and the cicadas are singing all around them. And cicadas are really loud. I briefly, I lived in Missouri almost a decade ago now. And I remember the cicadas lived in the trees near where I was, and it almost drives you mad. It almost drives you crazy. There's such a loud, and the trees were coming right up to this property where I was living, and they were incredibly loud and incessant, unstopping. And so Socrates and Phaedrus are hearing this the whole time. They're trying to have their philosophical dialogue. The cicadas are just roaring all around them. And so Socrates goes on, and if they saw the two of us avoiding conversation at midday, like most people, diverted by their song and sluggish of mind, nodding off, they would have every right to laugh at us, convinced that a pair of slaves had come to their resting place to sleep like sheep gathering around the spring in the afternoon. But if they see us in conversation, steadfastly navigating around them as if they were the sirens, they will be very pleased and immediately give us the gift from the gods they are able to give to mortals. The gift from the gods they are able to give to mortals, Socrates writes. Phaedrus then asks, What is this gift? I don't think I've heard of it. Socrates then says, everyone who loves the muses should have heard of this. The story goes, and here's what we call the myth of the cicadas, this really important passage. Everyone who loves the muses should have heard of this. The story goes that the cicadas used to be human beings who lived before the birth of the muses. So this is an origin story. It's an origin myth. Cicadas used to be human beings who lived before the birth of the muses. When the muses were born and song was created for the first time, some of the people of that time were so overwhelmed with the pleasure of singing that they forgot to eat or drink. So they died without even realizing it. It is from them that the race of the cicadas came into being. And as a gift from the muses, they have no need of nourishment once they are born. Instead, they immediately burst into song without food or drink until it is time for them to die. I love this imagery. I love this idea. It's so very poetic and artistic and romantic. The kind of like ancient prototype of the starving artist or something like that. After they die, they go to the Muses and tell each one of them which mortals have honored her. To Terpiscore they report, and my ancient Greek is, my pronunciations aren't fantastic. Terpiscacor, they report those who have honored her by their devotion to the dance and thus make them dearer to her. To Erato, they report those who honored her by dedicating themselves to the affairs of love. So dance, love, and so too with the other muses according to the activity that honors each. And to Calliope, the oldest among them, and Urania, the next after her, who preside over the heavens in all discourse, human and divine, and sing with the sweetest voice, they report those who honor their special kind of music by leading a philosophical life. And this I really love because, the second half of the dialogue of Phaedrus, it's all about this core attack against the sophists. Socrates is trying to build this case about how a person must be a great philosopher first. They must seek the truth. They must have ethics. And only then should they practice the art of rhetoric. Only then should they try to be persuasive and powerful with their language. You have to think before you speak. That's the whole point of this dialogue, really, broken down into a very tiny nutshell. Of course, it's much more complicated than that, but that's the kind of central argument that Socrates is making, and especially in the second half of the dialogue. Socrates is saying is the muses honor most those who have led a philosophical life. It's a special kind of music, a special kind of artistry to live a philosophical life. There are many reasons then why we should talk and not waste our afternoon in sleep, and so on and so on. So this is this key passage about. Now here, why I like this so much is because earlier in the dialogue we have this really important passage. It's the end of the first half of the dialogue, where Plato has Socrates tell us that madness is a gift. Madness is a divine gift from the gods. You have to understand that. You have to understand that Socrates is celebrating madness in order to understand this dialogue. Because what happens in the beginning? Phaedrus has a speech from Lysias, and in that speech, Lysias is making the argument that you should not take a lover who is truly in love with you because they are mad, right? You should only allow someone to love you, only fall in love with someone, only partner yourself with someone who is still in control of their right mind, who is still rational. Socrates then begins to make a speech in the same argument, trying to do it more artfully, trying to model something for Phaedrus, trying to show how a more beautiful speech could be made. But then the daemon, then Socrates' conscience wakes up and tells him, no, wait a moment. Madness is actually this great gift. Madness gives us poetry. Madness gives us prophecy. Madness saves us from suffering, and so on. Madness is this generative, creative, musical force. Madness is a generative, creative, musical force that is a gift from the gods and is a way for the human to channel the most divine and profound insights that the universe has to offer. And it's in the myth of the cicadas here that this comes to life again in this really poetic little snippet. Who preside over the heavens and all discourse, human and divine, and sing with the sweetest voice. They report those who honor their special kind of music by leading a philosophical life. So this is just one tiny snippet in Plato's Phaedrus that I love, I find fascinating. And then I'm reading it here for you to show you some of the associations and interests that I have in it, and then how it relates to some of the major themes throughout the rest of the dialogue, specifically the theme on the relationship between rhetoric and philosophy, and the theme on madness and that proof of the divine gifts of madness, where Socrates enumerates those 4 divine gifts of madness, which is a necessary turning point in the structure of the dialogue. Hope you enjoyed this. Plato's Phaedrus is one of my favorite things ever written by humans. It continues to provide inspiration for me, and I think it is perhaps the most important text to read to understand the history of human language, communication, literature, philosophy, and rhetoric. Good luck out there.